Hello and welcome to the Underhive. We are back with some more How to Command the Death Guard. In this series, we're going to take a look at every aspect of the Death Guard. So whether you're looking to get more out of your army or you're thinking of joining Nurgle's feculent festivities, then there's something here for you. In this episode, we're going to continue our look with the stratagems, and we're moving on to the charge and fight phase. There's not an awful lot in the charge phase, so we'll cover that briefly and then move on to the real meat of the matter in the fight phase. As you'd expect from the slow boys of the 14th, there are no stratagems for our own charge phase. The only thing you can do is re-roll a failed charge with the default re-roll for a command point. However, there are some stratagems we can use in our opponent's charge phase. Now, I like to run the inexorable. I'm pretty open about that. One of the reasons is for their stratagem. For 1 CP, you can -2 to charge rolls targeting the specific unit you've selected this phase. So whether that's a unit out on a wide objective that your opponent has maybe struck in on turn 2, turn 3, you know that they've struck in because they want that 9-inch charge, maybe less with certain armies. Adding 2 to the distance that they've got to make to get in there significantly decreases the chances that they'll make it. Doesn't matter what they needed to get there, another 2 makes it harder. Whether it's out on the sort of wide objectives or it's on the mainline engagement, it can be very effective, because particularly if you've left your mainline engagement in such a way that they can't just charge one unit, they end up having to charge multiple. You pick the unit that they can't avoid charging, and that means anything they want to charge on that mainline engagement, they're going to have to pick that as well, and as a result, they're going to be -2. So denying that charge, of course, is massive, particularly for a melee army. Missing the opportunity to do their melee attacks is hugely detrimental, not only because they're not getting to deal the damage, but because that then effectively ends their turn, and then you get to move forwards by 5-inch on average, and then get to make a 4-inch charge or whatever it would have been, and there's not much chance of you failing that, even with things your opponent might do to prevent you. So again, very, very strong no matter how you want to use it. The other one there is Dark Cravings. So this is Bloat Drone specific. Bloat Drones can heroically intervene 6-inch horizontal and 5-inch vertical. So briefly, heroic intervention is essentially a movement that occurs during the charge phase, and it's generally just characters. Certain characters can do it by 6-inch or more than 3, but the default is that characters can move 3 inches to join the combat. They don't count as having charged, though. Now, many rules that say they get +1 attack or like additional AP or what have you will be when they heroically intervene as well. So they will often get some kind of benefit for it, but they don't count as charging. So the Bloat Drone, of course, given that it can fly, means that that 6 inches as the drone flies. They can go over models. They're not going to struggle to get in the engagement as long as they are within 6 of it. And particularly if you've gone with the Flesh Mower, in the engagement is exactly where they want to be. So if you do take a charge, maybe even combined with in the inexorable specific stratagem, so maybe only 1 enemy unit made the charge when they will ideally want in 2 or 3 in there, and then it's a 1v1 engagement, but the Bloat Drone moves over 5 or 6 inches to make it a 2v1. They may still get to attack first unless you've got the Foul Blight Spawn there to prevent that, but if you do, it's even better. But ultimately, it's a 2v1. Yeah, they might kill your squad of poxwalkers or severely batter them, but then the Bloat Drone's going to come in and finish them off. So fantastic individual effects, but also fantastic combined to make your opponent's charge phase a really difficult phase for them to get value out of. But now we will move on to the fight phase. So first things first, poxwalkers. Poxwalkers are a chaffy cheap unit, but they can be immensely powerful, especially now they've come down to 5 points, essentially erasing cultists from the codex. So Mutant Strain is the general stratagem you can use, but it combines very, very well with the Harbinger's specific stratagem, which I'll cover next. So Mutant Strain is probably one of the single most powerful stratagems in the Codex because it turns a chaff unit into a real threat. What it does, when the poxwalkers attack, any sixes automatically deal more sixes to hit. Deal mortal wounds to the enemy after any other damage has been dealt with, and any ones deal mortal wounds to the poxwalkers. Now the poxwalkers do have a 6-up feel no pain, so they may shrug some of them, but not necessarily that many because it's only on a 6. Your opponent may have that sort of feel no pain effect, or they may not. And especially if they don't, then that's going to just go straight through. I will come back to it in a combos video and go through the calculations and how they break down against certain enemies. But against like typical Marine unit, even without any buffs on the poxwalkers, you'd expect a handful of mortal wounds, certainly kill a model or two. If you've got a full squad of 20 poxwalkers with 40 attacks, 1 in 6 of those is not automatically, but 1 in 6 of those is on average gonna be a 6. So you're expecting 6 or 7 mortal wounds maybe on average, which is enough to kill a character in a lot of cases. So they go from being just something that takes up space on the board and maybe deals a few wounds here or there, to something that can really churn out mortal wounds, especially when you consider that you can revive them in your command phase if your opponent doesn't manage to kill them all. But that combines particularly well with the Harbinger's stratagem. We covered that in its own video, so just to touch back on it, it's 1 CP, and it allows our Poxwalker unit to re-roll hit rolls, and it's all hit rolls. So not only does that let you re-roll the ones and potentially take less damage yourself when you've re-rolled them, but also you could double down on the 6s and just re-roll everything that isn't a 6, hunting for more. Does have the downside, you might end up rolling more 1s on your second batch than you did on your first, but in theory you will also roll some more 6s and push out even more damage. Depending on the type of enemy they're up against, let's say it's a really tough vehicle, you might not be expecting any of the hits to go through anyway, and you might just be relying on the mortal wounds to deal the damage. So in that case, I would certainly value having the full rerolls to get those additional 6s by just re-rolling everything that wasn't a 6. So between the two for 2 CP there, you can turn a 100-point chaff unit that can otherwise be your objective unit or your action unit for a few turns of the game, and suddenly turn it round to being something that can wipe out a 200-point dreadnought fairly consistently if you're combining both of those on a full squad. So it's not always going to line up that way, but you can still put the hurt on something that by rights they really shouldn't be able to. So fantastic couple of combinations there. A solid reason to run as many poxwalkers as you can. Next up, we've got the Marines. So Marines in the fight phase. Given that they've got the free upgrades now, I'm sure we are going to see more full 10-man melee weapons through the nose. Just so many swinging attacks with melee weapons. So juicing up the Marines in the fight phase is probably going to be something on everybody's agenda from time to time. So first up, we've got Trench Fighters, which is an additional attack using Plague Knives for every Plague Marine that has one. You can freely upgrade the champion from a Plague Knife to the Plague Blade, but they wouldn't get the additional attack with it as a result of this stratagem. I think if you plan to use this stratagem and you're accounting for the fact that that might come up, then you might want to leave the Plague Knife on the Sergeant just so you can have the additional attack with it. But obviously his Power Fist is now free. I don't think you need to use Trench Fighters so much anymore. The reason to use it is that they all only had Plague Knives, and getting 10 additional attacks with them was nice. But if they're now going to be 2 of them with flails, 2 of them with cleavers, 2 of them with the mace and axe, maybe another 2 with axes, ultimately you don't necessarily need those additional 5 to 10 attacks. You may well be fine on your own, or better using one of these other stratagems, particularly this next one. Haze of Corruption can go on a core unit. When it kills a model, any overspilt damage carries over without a further armor save. So again, as we've mentioned, the Cleaver deals D6 damage, the Flail deals flat 2, and that can be relevant even on 2 wound models if they've got one that has 1 wound left. So one is dealt to that model and the other one carries over to the next without them getting an armor save, so you're not wasting that damage. And the mace is a flat 3 as well. So again, the flat 3 might overspill on certain models, but it's not going to in this case. If they are 1 wound models, it kills 3 per hit, which is phenomenal. So all round, Haze of Corruption has definitely gone up in value as a result of upgrading the Plague Marines. It is a core unit as well, to be fair, so you can use this on your Terminators, but it's only really going to be relevant on the Death Shroud using the cleave attack. But of course, the cleave attack. But of course, they have got the scythe attack, so if it, it might have just been relevant to use the other profile if it's 1 wound models, rather than cost yourself a CP. Next one is Creeping Blight for 1 CP. Unmodified wound rolls of a 6 become -4 AP. I don't think this is as relevant anymore. It was good on the Plague Knives that are -1 AP. Sometimes going up to -4 with some of the wounds is pretty good. But because now you'll have flail, axes, whatever, they've got more AP than a knife does. So you don't necessarily need to go to 4 AP. I think your value's better on Haze of Corruption where relevant rather than Creeping Blight. We have mentioned it already. Eternal Hatred for 2 CP, +1 to wound. Can be used in the shooting phase, particularly good with Terminators with Bolters or the Death Shroud at that point. But in the fight phase, it can be very good on your full melee Plague Marines. It can also be good on Terminators, of course, as well, because they're dealing a lot of melee attacks themselves. 2 CP for it's quite a lot, but bearing in mind we might be up against a model with very good saves and already a decent wound roll, say maybe wounded on 3s with some of those heavier weapons like the cleaver. Being able to wound on 2s and again re-rolling 1s because it's a plague weapon makes those attacks that get through the hit roll that bit more consistent. So certainly something to consider even for the price tag of 2 CP, because if it lets you kill a unit this turn, particularly in turn 2 or 3, the first turns that you'll be getting into melee, then yeah, it can be really, really valuable to spend 2 CP on that. And again, given that we recover 2 CP in most of the missions each battle round, once in our turn, once in our opponent's turn, by the time you get to turn 2, even if you've spent a lot in the requisition phase, you should still be able to afford this stratagem for 2 CP. Terminators specifically have Break Their Spirits. When a Terminator model kills a model in a unit, that unit is -4 leadership until the end of the turn. So it is only a single morale phase, and it can only affect infantry, beasts, or swarms. But of course, they are the types of units that will likely fail morale. They have multiple models in the squad. Certainly more elite units, maybe only like 3-man squads, like say Death Shroud, are a lot harder to force to fail morale. Something like this debuff would make that more possible, even if you've only killed 1 model. Given the secondary, we will just touch on it here. Given the secondary that requires you to kill models and benefits you for killing them with plague weapons, which is something you'll probably want to do anyway, you may then want to use this stratagem to get the extra points for forcing the enemy to fail morale. So let's find that. It is Fleeing Vectors. At the end of the turn, score 1 point if 7 or more models were destroyed by Death Guard models. Another point if 7 or more were destroyed by plague weapons specifically. And another 2 victory points if a unit failed morale. So if you know where you are points-wise in the game, maybe you want to just score it in an early turn and get 4 points from that secondary in turn 2. That can be very, very powerful, particularly if you've struck in your Terminators, they've made their 9-inch charge, and you go, yeah, you know what, I'm going to double down and try and get a couple of victory points here. -4 to your leadership, you will almost certainly fail it, or you may have to spend 2 CP to force it to be passed. And putting your opponent in the position where they have to spend 2 CP for your 1 CP, and even still you're not that bothered, you're probably still going to score a point on the primary, if not 2, point on the secondary, if not 2, because killing 7 models isn't that hard while there's some infantry left. Ultimately, it can be well worth it, both in terms of securing additional points on that secondary, or just forcing your opponent to either spend 2 CP or risk losing a load more models than they would have. So yeah, not bad at 1 CP. Certainly a more reasonable pick now they've changed that secondary. The old secondary felt like it was pointless to take because you had to use this really frequently, and that just made it a bad choice, so you didn't want to use the stratagem because you didn't have the secondary. Whereas now, I think you will be taking fleeing vectors most of the time, so this becomes relevant to use at least once throughout the game. Also, again, Vermid Whispers can be used in the shooting phase, can also be used in the fight phase, arguably more effective for either flavour of Terminator to get +1 to hit in melee, which is where they're going to be dealing more of their damage. Outside of the Blight Lords with melters, obviously, they can get some damage done in shooting. +1 to hit, it's pretty straightforward. If if your Death Shroud are swinging the heavy attack, they've got -1, you can put them back up to that 2-up. And again, re-rolling ones because they're core if there's a Lord of the Death Guard nearby, so they can very, very consistently push damage in that manner. The rest of these are for vehicles. So we've got, in fact, there's just the one there. Demonic Gluttony, Demon Engine only, restore 1 wound per model killed up to 3 for this phase. So the obvious pick for me is the Bloat Drone with the Flesh Mower. That's why I like to include them in the list, because your opponent will try and shoot them down. They're fairly tough and got that 5-up invuln, so they may well stick around even under the full weight of your opponent's fire. Particularly if you've got a couple of them. And so as a result, you know they're going to be injured by the time they get in combat most of the time. Being able to go in and kill 3 infantry models is not a big ask on 12 attacks on the profile they've got. So you're very likely to be able to restore a couple, if not all 3 wounds. And restoring 3 wounds to a model that your opponent is really focusing on shooting down is always valuable, because it means they have to commit that bit more firepower in order to finish them off, and that means they're not shooting at the rest of your army. You can get on with your game plan. Now, these last 2 can occur in any phase, but they're very likely to occur in your opponent's fight phase, because otherwise you wouldn't use it. Eruption of Filth is 1 CP. When a character's killed, they can explode. So 3-inch explosion, you roll a d6. On a 2-up, the model suffers the enemy unit suffers 1 mortal wound. On a 6, they suffer d3. So if your character is sniped by an enemy character that's very low on health, particularly if they're only at 1 wound remaining and feel no pain, then you could look to snipe them back for 1 CP with Eruption of Filth. It's not going to happen a lot, but there are scenarios where that can be well worth 1 CP. And then the other is very, very similar. 1 CP for Putrid Detonation, a vehicle explodes. So it's not really worth it unless you're targeting something that's got a D3 or D6 explosion, other than if you know it guaranteed will kill something with 1 mortal wound, like the Blight Haulers and the drones would. Again, they explode on a 4-up, so I'd probably just roll the dice on it, even if that was the case, rather than pay the CP. But again, if it killed an enemy character and they've not got to feel no pain, I'd certainly consider it, because if you don't roll the 4-up, it's going to suck to have to try and kill that character when you could have just done it for a CP. So that's everything for the stratagems. Hopefully you enjoyed that. I certainly enjoyed going through them with you. What sort of stratagems do you like to use? Do you focus on the requisition? Do you like to focus on the command? Is it the shooting? Is it the fighting? Are you like me? Do you go inexorable and look to deny your opponent's charges as much as possible? Because that is very effective when it comes off. But of course, there are a variety of other routes you go down, or could go down. Either way, though, thank you so much for watching. Thank you to everybody that's got involved. Whether it's a like, a comment, a sub, it really does mean a lot to me. So thank you so much for that. But otherwise, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time in the Underhive.